Welcome to the History Nerds Night podcast. I'm your head nerd, Brendan. Thank you so much for being here. Today, Kim Major, her book, Hunger to Kill. This is the most intense episode we've ever done, all right? Kim, retired homicide detective. She got serial killer Shawn Grate to confess, all right? That in and of itself is going to be interesting, but I'm so appreciative. Kim was game for anything. I asked questions. She didn't evade them. You could tell she goes to some places that she may not want to go to, but she was awesome. Answering questions, having this deep conversation. I am not going to belabor the point. I'm going to shut up. Let's do it. And here we are with author and retired detective Kim Major, A Hunger to Kill, a serial killer, a determined detective, and the quest for confession that changed a small town forever, along with co-writer Lisa Pulitzer. Kim, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Now, Kim, when you're writing a book, it probably is really helpful to have a co-author with the last name Pulitzer. Is that kind of just hoping that it would put some good juju on it?
The planets lined up when I got Lisa Pulitzer. Yes.
First of all, I should ask, you are now retired from the force. How are you enjoying retirement, even though I know you're already back at work somewhere else?
So I retired on a Tuesday, started my new job on a Wednesday. So I've never stopped working. I still maintain a police commission, and I still do forensic interviews and suspect interviews for different agencies. I did one late last night, so I'm still in the mix, and I still feel like I have some in me, so I'm still at it.
Did the next day even feel different at all, or it just felt like, oh, I'm not going to have to wear a uniform this time?
It did not get to feel different, and I've always been told, since I've never really been debriefed from all the cases that I've worked. So I was always told, when you sever this, get ready, because it may come flooding in. So I left my job and went straight to another job where I had to learn everything. So my focus never got to be that, that lull where you're sitting there and it all has an opportunity. So to this point, I have not had a chance to sit back and really realize anything. So no, I'm still full force ahead.
Well, what made you decide to write the book? Because I think a lot of people don't realize, we were just talking about this, I come from a family with a lot of law enforcement in it. Getting you people to actually sit down and really talk about something is kind of difficult. Writing this book, was it a hard decision for you? Did people have to say you need to write it? How did you get here?
Well, I had turned down many projects during the time period when the case was being investigated, working its way through the system. Eventually, I was approached by a family member of one of the victims. She was concerned about her loved one was being portrayed in the media. She was actually in tears, and she was telling me, do something. She was begging me to do something. And at the time, I had turned on many projects, and I was thinking, what am I going to do? She's saying this to me, and it just hit me. It was like, you know what? I will do something. I'm not powerless here. She may feel like it, but I can be a conduit. And you know what? I'm going to write it. I decided to tell the truth from my vantage point, and I did. I dedicated myself then to writing the book, telling the truth from my perspective with a few goals in mind. I wanted to describe the victims as being valuable people. I wanted to kind of memorialize for my 3 kids, memorialize for them that this is what I was doing, that your mom might have got something right. And beyond that, I wanted to help others to learn from what we got right and maybe where we missed the mark as well. So if something like this can happen and we don't learn from it, we would have to question our purpose. So I just wanted to do the right thing.
And you really hit on a type of true crime that there's not a lot of it out there. And you just mentioned it was from your point of view, which means the book is not about who done it. You know really quickly who did what. And it's more about opening up Shawn Grate and what he did. And like you said, your vantage point. So it's not a who done it. It's not... Honestly, what I hate was when true crime is just kind of murder porn and everything. This was, here's the story as I saw it, as opposed to trying to just tell a whole story where Shawn Grate is at the middle, right?
Your assessment is spot on. That is exactly what it is. I couldn't have worded it better than that. It's my perspective. It's coming from a different angle where it's kind of my life and his life, different but the same, but how we kind of collide in the end. And it gives people a frame of reference, I think, when you can kind of see some of me, which I was so hesitant to give. I was so hesitant to open up about myself or my childhood or my life, and I did. But I thought to give people a frame of reference for what they're reading then, they better know me to know why I'm saying and doing things I am in the interview. So Initially, I was hesitant about that piece, and then I relented and said, okay, here we go.
How nervous were you writing a book? Because you're trained to go in there and sit there with a suspect, and you have a game plan, and we're going to talk about exactly what that looks like. But I find that if you take somebody highly skilled like you and you just say, all right, you're going to take what you do, but now you're writing a book, and there's no real training for writing a book, I have to feel like there's almost a different type of nerves than sitting in there with a serial killer.
Yes, I have to say it's intimidating. I would be more comfortable sitting in front of a rapist or someone that's harmed somebody. I'd be more comfortable than to put myself out there writing a book, because that was my niche. This is not my niche. So trying to be authentic was telling it the way it is. It was so profoundly important to me to get it right. So if I was just freestyling, writing something that I was being creative on, it's a whole different scenario than trying to document or memorialize things the way it was and to get it right. So it's intimidating, but I have to say Charlie Spicer from St. Martin's Press has been he and his team have been amazing to work with. Beyond that, the co-writer, Lisa Pulitzer, nothing short of incredible. This woman actually came to my town and stayed here and immersed herself in small town America just to be able to have a pulse on what it's like here. So that was impressive in itself. And to have her come from the city to come to my holiday parade where somebody's, leading goats through the parade, and she's looking at these goats like, what is happening? So she immersed herself, and I think that is what makes her so genuine, how she could relate. So we meshed very well. I think that's critical when you're talking about subject matter like this. That's so critical.
And the first part of the book, it's very descriptive. And besides the goats, tell me a little bit more about Ashland, Ohio, and that area, so that as somebody who's going to go into this book, what kind of area are we talking about? Is it built up? Is it farm? I mean, you already said goats, but please go right ahead.
In our town, there's less than 30,000 people. We're centrally located between Cleveland and Columbus, right off the interstate in Ohio. It's small town America, quintessential, beautiful hanging flowers in the summer in our downtown. We're on the move. We're all in this Rust Belt situation, and we have a really active mayor, city council, community leaders who they just try to catapult us out of anything and into the good. We have lots of churches here, lots of community functions. We have a county fair, which it's just where you go to see people. As a police officer, we're embraced here. So we are treated so well. When I roll through town, I feel like I'm in a parade all the time. People are good to us, and we are good to them. And it has been beneficial, even in cases like this, where you can talk to people. Our community has lots of family functions, Friday night lights. Sports are a big deal here. It's a big deal across America in towns like mine. Festivals and events, church functions, as well as, a yearly Bloom Fest. We have our fireworks. It's a small town feel. But at the time of this case, we were definitely on the move, making things better, beautification projects, trying to just rethink how you make money, rethink industry, rethink businesses. So things were going well. I'm not going to say that it isn't now. It's definitely still going. We're still plugging along. This doesn't go away.
Speaking of this event, the day that you got Shawn Grate in your crosshairs, what do you remember about that day? How do you get in there? How do you end up in that room? What do you know when you walk into that room and sit down with Grate?
Well, that's a good one. That's a good question. So when this case came out, it was really early morning. I was in the shower getting ready for work, and I hear my phone on the bathroom counter. I hear 2 phone calls, and I hear a text. Well, my kids are home, and my husband, so I'm like, well, who's calling me this early? Somebody thinks I'm on the way to work, my mom or something. So when the calls and texts didn't stop, I stepped out of the shower quickly. I grabbed my phone, and I can see that it's my captain. So we called him back, and he gruffed at me and said, 2 calls and a text. And I said, I was in the shower. And he said, I need you. And he told me why, that they had a female Jane Doe who had been kidnapped, sexually assaulted. He said they needed me to come in to interview her immediately. So I threw my clothes on, and I went in, and she was on station. So I interviewed her in my office, which I have set up for forensic interviews, which I do. I interviewed her. Notable about her, besides just the appearance that she had been victimized, was almost instantly recognizing her sound faith. I can say in all of my years, I don't know that I've come across someone that absolute tied to and sound in her faith, even through this process. So I was taken visually by the injuries I could see, taken secondarily by her faith. And thirdly, all my senses really come into play in times like that. You always read about that or hear about it, it's true. But I could smell the suspect on her. I interviewed sex offenders. I could smell the testosterone. I could smell the sweat. And, it just became kind of a profound thing. So I finished up with her, and then I immediately came out of the room and was directed by my captain to go in and talk to Shawn Grate about what he had done to her, because I had just interviewed her. So he said, go in and get the facts about what he did. What he said, what she says he did. Go in there and see if it lines up. And right before I walked in, he said, and while you're in there, see if he knows anything about the missing girls. So I entered the room, and it went from there.
I think a lot of people would ask, how do you not just walk into that room and punch him in the face, right? You were just with somebody who you've seen how horrifically they've been treated. It's not just a he said, she said. You've looked at the victim, and then you walk in there. How do you, and especially with the way this unfolds, you can't even just be like, oh, just don't punch him in the face. You have to present somebody who could be on his side from the first second. You don't want to put him on his back feet where he's just going to yell lawyer and then you can't talk to him. How do you go in there with anything but anger just emanating off you?
Just based off your question, I can tell you have 5 or 6 family members who are cops. I can see it. I get asked a lot of questions, but sometimes the way it's framed, I can tell. When I walk in a room, anytime I walk in with a suspect, I have some idea what's going on. I've done my homework, whether I had 15 minutes to do it or 3 days. But I don't have time to think about my own emotion or my own reaction even to what's being said, because I don't know if that comes just through doing it for so long or if it comes through knowing. It's almost like in parallel with a coach. I watched my husband coach football when he was coaching in the offense. I watched the team get a touchdown. And then I watch everybody jump up in the air and celebrate. And then I'm watching him. There's no reaction to that. I'm on to the next thing because I have a job to do here. There's no time for this tweet or end zone dance. We have things to do. I feel in an interview, it's not about my emotions. I have to keep them in check. I'm hyper aware of that, because when you're talking to somebody, if they notice even a nuance about what they're saying, if I show disgust or show anything, they're watching me. I can watch them watch my eyes back and forth. They're looking into me, and they're good at it. They're watching for my reaction, and if I show disapproval or judgment, people shut down. So I don't know if it's just over time I learned not to do that, or if that's just who I am. So it's not about me. It's about the information I'm trying to gain. So I have to be ahead of what I'm saying, because I have to anticipate their response and what I'm going to say next or do next. So it's dynamic. You don't go in with a checklist and say, okay, how about this? It's dynamic, and you get it just spiders off into something completely different. But you have to be ahead of someone, which is extra difficult when the person you're talking to has thought about what they did, sometimes for years. In this case, a decade. They think about what they've done, and they think about it every day, and they rehearse what they would say, and they play out scenarios, and then it's new to me. So I have to keep that in check every time. It's why I don't interview with anyone else in the room, whether that's a victim or whether that's a suspect. I interview them alone. I can't worry about someone else's reaction to what they say, or that micro time that it took for them to look at my reaction and the person next to me's reaction. I have to be in sync, just me. So that works. It works for me.
Now, as a detective, your antenna is always up anyway, but you walk in there and you also have in the back of your mind, there are also missing women. At the same time, when you first see Grate, does anything feel different than other suspects that you've ever sat down with? Now, right, like you have a lot of evidence already for one thing, but did it ever enter in your mind early on when you see him, like, something else is going on here? Is he giving off a vibe? Is there just something in your gut saying there's more to this than just this one incident?
About halfway through my career, I started treating every interview as if there's more. The first half of my career, I would get a confession on something somebody did, and then I would come out of the room doing high fives and knuckle bumps because I got a confession. The second half, and even more progressing towards the end, I realized all this time I've been getting partial confessions. I do live with that guilt. I can't say when I went into that room that he was much different than anyone else not anyone else, some that I have interviewed. I sit across from people that have similar thought processes as him, especially working sex offenses. When you get someone to be candid and they'll tell you what they think about doing, or what their fantasy would be if they could get by with it, more than a fantasy, what they would do if they could get by with it. Once, you get people to be candid and they open up to those things, when you're talking to someone that anything's an option to say. Nothing should surprise me. Can't say that some of this didn't surprise me. Some of this was new. But when I'm talking to him, initially I had no idea. No one had any idea that he had killed anyone. We thought he kidnapped someone. He sexually assaulted her. He held her captive. He kind of knew her, not in that way. They never dated, nothing like that. So it was like, okay, this is a one-time thing. We knew going into the room that we had 2 women that were missing, one from our town, one from the next county over, not in any area that he had traversed, but we knew those women didn't know each other and weren't similar in any way. So I didn't know that he had done that, but I was certainly willing to explore if he knew anything about it. My initial take on him was, wow, his thoughts aren't much different than mine or anyone else's. We just had a normal conversation. I was kind of taken in just the physicality of the situation. What does he look like? What things are notable to me about the way he looks or the way he talks? I was trying to type his personality to know better how to approach him. I was really focused on that, didn't know what he had done, but noted that he didn't seem right off the bat any different. It's not like I sat in front of him and thought, oh, now this one did something. I honestly didn't know that. No one did.
I think there's a lot of, cop shows where these confessions are, for lack of a better term, there's a holy shit moment where the skies part and you're like, wait a second, this is happening right now. It seems like for this one, it was more of a drip, 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 something. Drip, 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 something else. It was peeling an onion as opposed to a firecracker going off.
That is so well said. Initially, he opened up to what he had done to Jane Doe, probably because we had Jane Doe and he knew we had her and that she was talking. So it's kind of hard to deny what's right in front of us. Sometimes people will confess to what we already know, but getting the part we don't know it's like pulling teeth. With him, he gave that so that he willingly gave that. I mean, not willingly, he gave it. It was not incredibly difficult to get that piece. Getting him to acknowledge the culpability of it was a little bit more difficult, but he did. But then there's this whole time period of that's all he said. He didn't give any inkling that he did anything else to anyone. And I was pushing, and you're kind of thinking, I'm treating him like he did something. I don't know if he did it, but I'm going to act like he did it. I'm going for it. So you have to check your ego at the door because you're pushing through to try to get something that you don't know that is there. And there's people observing your interview, so you're almost on the outside looking in at yourself. A pretty interesting process. It feels interesting. It feels peculiar. But as I pushed, I kept pressing and pressing, and he honestly didn't give the victim I was questioning him about, he didn't give her. He didn't give the other one that would have been in my county. It took a long time, and he gave me someone else.
About how long were you talking to him before that second victim comes up?
Wow. I was in there for mid-morning till nighttime, so it was a while. I didn't know what he had done, but I knew there was something in there at some point. I was trying to get a read on that, coming in at different angles, different approaches, trying to find what's his weakness, what does he care about, where is his rock bottom, what does he not want to lose, what would keep him from wanting to tell me what he did, and trying to find those things became quite a focus for me. At some point, I knew I could get him, I just didn't know what he had done. So it's hard to know what to ask because I don't know what he did. And this is a guy who does not want to be portrayed as being dishonest. If I question whether he's being honest, he shuts down. He's done it before. He did it after me. If you tell him he's lying, he shuts down. He's done. Then you pack it up. And then you wonder, okay, why did I say that? Why did I say it? Why did I word it that way? So you have to check your ego and not make it about yourself, not try to get zingers in on somebody or try to say the cool TV thing, which I don't find difficult. I say corny things. I say things that people giggle about, they tease me about, the way I phrase it. But you know what? It works for me. It worked here.
I mean, it worked really well. I do subtitles for books, just kind of, a fun, cheeky thing to do. And this one I said it was a one-way love story. Not that I'm necessarily saying Grate fell in love with you, but he really took to you. But by the time this was over, it seems like he thought, man, Kim is on my side. She's with me. She's going to take care of me. And as you said, you were in there for so long. Just how do you, it comes back to, it starts out, he's not a likable guy and he's only going to get worse. And this evil starts to come out of him. But like you said, if you want anything out of him, he's got to think you're his friend. How do you keep that up for such a long period of time? Is it really just robot mode, not about me? I just got to keep going?
I guess simplistically, yes. I know it's not about me because there's things I wanted to know as this progressed, and it's in the book. Like, it's actually shocking. It's so surreal, some things that happened during this, where I want to ask questions when you hear that he said something in the jail or something you want to know, but I'm like, what gain is that? If I ask that, that could shut him down, and really that's about me. I don't need it. So you have to pick and choose on those things, and it's so difficult. For me, probably my strongest point in my interviews is empathy. I live with empathy. So if I'm sitting across from someone, I don't care who it is, I can feel empathy. I can see them as a 4-year-old. And I don't have to fake empathy. If I didn't have it to the level I have it, I would have to fake that I have it. I just don't have to worry about that because I feel it anyhow. So it doesn't mean that I feel okay about what anybody does. Like, this is so heinous, what happened in these situations. It's the most horrendous, intimate, torturous thing I can imagine in this case that anyone should be able to imagine, I hope. And I recognize that all of my emotions have to be in check. You have to maintain that. So my mind is not on generally that moment. I can make a checklist in my head. I know the elements of my crimes. If I go into a case, I know the elements of that crime that I'm looking at. If it switches gears like it did in this case, I happen to know the elements of those crimes as well. So I'm picking those off in my head. I know I have that. I know I have that. And then it's time to move on. With him, he's only willing to give a little bit at a time, maybe about one piece of the situation. I have to move on and then come back. So trying to remember those things is tough. I can actually see looking back where I don't have closure on some points because I didn't get to address them. Maybe things took a different turn. But the entire time I tried to keep my emotions in check always. And with him as well. I had to do it or I would have lost him.
This strange oxymoron about people like Grate, psychopaths, sociopaths, and I don't know if he was diagnosed that, and I don't care, F him. But they can also be very charming. Did that come through too? Because I know it sounds so stupid to say out loud because he's a rapist, he's a murderer. But these types of people almost seem to have that weird power to make you forget that for a second. And you're like, oh, yeah. And then, oh, wait a second, you're a piece of garbage. Was he like that?
Wow, that is so true. I didn't have a baseline for him because it had just happened. We just got him. He's not from our town. We don't know him. So trying to get a baseline actually happened in that room with him. Outside of interviewing the victim who survived. That is absolutely correct. He's charming. He's charming in the interview. Generally, I can pick up if someone's doing that to me. It is who he is. There's a difference. It's easy to pick up when someone's pouring it on, where it's an effort for them. It's so effortless for him because that's who he is. And I guess the verification of that is he's had access this many times. He's found himself in a position, we can call it opportunistic. He works for it to create those situations where these things can happen. But if you can do something and fool people for over a decade and it keeps repeating itself, you have some charm. And he does. Add that to, he has piercing blue eyes that when these women describe him, women he went to school with, or women in the public, or even his mother. Describing him being charming or his eyes or different things about him, you could see why he finds himself in these positions around women sometimes.
How do you go home after something like this at night? I've been in the military, so I've been in those very, very stressful situations. Is it a lot like that where you walk away from it, but there is so much and your mind is still going? I always felt like my body was exhausted and I could feel that, but my mind was still kind of exploding. I mean, do you even sleep that night when you get home, or is there just, I can get more out of them?
Wow, that is a really good one. I went home that night. I just wanted to connect with my kids, my family. That's what I wanted to do. It's what I want to do every time. It's what I did last night. I don't care if it's midnight or 2 a.m. I'm going to go in my kids' rooms. I want to see them. I want to pull everything into me, like reset. This is my life. These are my people right here, and everything's okay. I always feel okay because I don't process it. I think like debriefing a police officer is critical. And I will openly say in 30 years, I've never been debriefed one time. I'm well over 1,000 cases. I've never been debriefed one time. I work cases with babies that we've lost. I've held babies that are gone. I've been to suicides. I've worked so many sex offenses, violent cases. It's unbelievable. I've never been debriefed. So for me, I am just always thinking ahead of the next thing, because you always have a caseload, so you might get done with one. Well, there's no time to sit down and process that. I have another case to do, another case. And in this case, it didn't end. I interviewed him 8 times for a total of I spent about 33 hours with him. So I didn't have any time for that. As a matter of fact, when I finished interviewing him on the last time, I wasn't done. I still was processing what needed to be done. I go home, I have a super good home life. I'm pretty strong in my faith, and that gets me through. But in this case, it never did get to be processed. It still hasn't. I still feel like I'm not done.
Then you go for the intensity of sitting with this guy and learning all of these things. And then I want to fast forward. I was able to go onto YouTube and see you giving testimony during the trial. And one thing I noticed, it's another dichotomy. It is so boring to watch testimony because there's the lawyers talking about something, there's weird noises, and there's hours of you on the stand. I remember sitting there going like, oh, I have to fast forward like 6 minutes before Kim even says something. But I did catch you at one point just on video, just kind of going like, and just kind of giving that. As the detective, how intense is it on the stand? Are you kind of in your head going over everything, trying to remember everything? Like you don't want to mess up? Or are you kind of like, I was there, I just have to say what happened and then just move on with my day?
It's the first thing. You're so afraid you're going to mess up because it's so formal and you're saying it, so you know you can't tell a lie, but you know it's also your recall, and you don't want to not say something. If you're blessed with an amazing prosecutor, like we were with Chris Tennell in this case, you're in a different place. As a matter of fact, I attended grand jury, which is a secret proceeding, when we charged him, and it was held in a secret location. And I walked into the room. It would be the first time I talked about the case within days of it occurring. And I walk into this room, which is not the typical room we would have grand jury in. And there's people, on the grand jury from our community sitting there. And I remember walking in and sitting up on the stand. And I looked over at our prosecutor, Chris Tennell, and I remember him saying something to me. I think he asked me for my name. And I thought I was fine. And I look over to my left, and we're at ground level, and I can see the leaves on the trees. I can hear the breeze. Everybody's quiet, waiting for me to speak. I'm looking out at this grand jury, and there's a lady on the grand jury that is probably in her late 70s, and her skin is perfect. Her skin is so beautiful and smooth, and her eyes are twinkling. And I remember looking at this lady thinking, I'm about to ruin your beautiful life. You will think about this every day for the rest of your life. It made me sick. The next thing you know, I feel like things are kind of closing in, and I'm not responding to Chris Tennell, who recognizes it. And he hesitates. And he kind of walked away from where he would ask the questions and just took a little breather, and then asked me something random on the stand and brought me right back in. And I was sitting there thinking, whoa, what was that? So you don't know that's occurring when you're standing up there. It's actually frightening. I'm not in control. I feel like I'm not in control. I'm asked a question. I'm going to tell the truth every time. But you don't want to mess up because there's so much at stake. For me, I don't recognize at the time generally that I'm having any impact. When this case happened, our video went down and I had a recorder down my top. No one even knew that. It was my backup recorder. I just dropped it down my top, went on in the interview. The main recorder went off. So my recorder down my top became the sole portion of this, the interview being memorialized for a good portion of that first day. Well, when I went to listen to that, to type my report, I was listening to that, reviewing, and I can hear my heart beating on my recorder. So my voice is fine, and I thought I felt fine. But my body knew I was about to get this confession before I knew it. And I can listen to what he's saying at the time that that's happening. It's unbelievable. So it's incredible to me. The effect on somebody's body without you knowing it, or the power that you have in your mind to control yourself. I definitely noticed that. But on the stand, for sure, that's tough. I mean, if you watch some of my colleagues that were testifying, just watching them in that position, try to do their part and do it right, and the pressure associated with that.
What I'm thinking right now is that we need to legalize pot for all police officers immediately. Just let you people go home, just rip one, and just, watch like some Real Housewives or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm just putting that out into the airwaves. You don't need to answer
put it
that.
out there. Yeah.
So I have a feeling you might have two answers to this, one on paper and one how you kind of feel. With everything that has happened, is there justice in this case? Can there be?
You're stumping me a little bit. That's a good one. Well, there's justice in the sense that he has the death penalty coming his way for what he did in my community. There's justice for Dana Lowry, that he did what he did. Marion County worked really hard with the DNA Doe project and BCI, our Attorney General's office, to identify her. There's justice in that sense. There's justice that he's held accountable. But none of that. We've even tore the house down where this happened. The tangible piece is gone. But those families wake up with this every single day. They wake up with it. And that's why profoundly important for me, for them to have not been lost in vain, to have some purpose in it for people to learn. So that's why I put myself out there a little bit. I don't hesitate to say the things I do wrong. I want people to learn from it. I want people to be safer because of it. I want people to feel more likely to come forward with something, because people always think, well, I'm not going to say anything because, what if I'm wrong? What if I said something about him and it was wrong? Well, guess what? What if you said nothing about him and you were right? And I say that in every situation. People need to feel more comfortable to say what they're feeling about things or what they think, because we can maybe keep these things from happening.
Have any of the families read the book and kind of given you feedback? I mean, I would certainly not fault them if they're like, it's good that you wrote it, Kim. I'm never touching this thing.
Right.
But have any of them tried to and just kind of given you feedback on it?
Yeah, I've had a little bit of feedback. Actually, someone I didn't anticipate contacted me, reached out to me through social media, and it just said, thank you. Well, I didn't know who the person was, so I didn't know what they're thanking me for. And then I didn't respond. So then they said something else, clarified what that meant. It wasn't the person who had asked me to talk about their family member the right way. It was actually somebody different who said, thank you for giving them clarity and some closure on some things that they wanted to know, that they had not read the book, that they want to, but that someone read to them some pieces about their family member.
All right, I'm going to completely switch gears here, because right now I need a drink. I don't know if you do.
Yeah.
Do you ever watch any cop shows? Because what I want to say is a lot of cop shows I already know are just completely ridiculous garbage. But are there any that have gotten even something like what you went through onto film the right way? Can you think of anything where you're kind of like, no, it's not going to be perfect. It's always going to be Hollywood. But if somebody wanted to know, here's what that intensity feels like, is there anything in Hollywood that you've seen that even compares?
Okay, so I'm going to put myself out there on this one. My husband watches these things all the time, and even the music freaks me out. So, and my family laughs. They're like, you live this stuff. What's wrong with you? And I'm like, I don't know. But it's been a humorous thing in my family. My husband, I'll be working a case, and my husband will say, hey, you should try whatever off of one of the shows. And he's right. So I've watched a little bit of all of them. And I have to say, there are some that are completely sensational. It's it's very obvious. But there are many that are truly realistic. As a matter of fact, they put a lot of work and time to depict accuracy on these things. So there's a lot of them that are spot on. I have to say there's a lot that are spot on. Now, some of the styles, like in an interview style, it may work for some other detective. It doesn't work for me. So me hovering over somebody yelling, it's just not going to work. We get autonomous in this job where we don't want to ask anyone for help. We think we can do it. But you know what? There was a piece of one of my interviews, and there are just thousands of comments. And in the comments, people pick things out of my interview that I did not pick up on. Some of that is underused. There are citizens who come up with stuff that is just amazing. There's also private agencies that solve cases, like on the DNA projects, identify people. There's absolutely no reason that we have a body that we find that we can't sort out who that is. It's resources. It's somebody latching a hold of that saying they're going to make this matter, because there are private agencies who are willing to help. So we even do that in law enforcement when you think your department can handle everything and you don't need, maybe your state agency like ours would be BCI, or you don't need the FBI because let they take over my case. They don't take over your case. They didn't take my case over. They were right there alongside me, like, what do you need? I was so thankful for that we didn't have that closed attitude about it, because it was the networking, the recognizing where our strengths were, where maybe our limitations were, that made this thing happen.
Well, two things. I am going to say that as the son of a DEA agent, I will not let you compliment the FBI. We're going to cut that whole part out. The second thing, though, is to summarize your answer to that question, what I heard was Law & Order's Lenny Briscoe is the greatest fictional detective of all time. We're memorializing that.
He is good stuff. That is right.
So, Kim, one more question for you. Listen, this is all intense. This book is intense. And there are people who, shy away from nonfiction, first of all, because they think it can't be as good as fiction. And, especially what we're talking about, this is heavy stuff. Some people would say, okay, there's a lot going on here. And if they said to you, why should I read this book? What would you say to them?
Some people say nonfiction is boring. And to say nonfiction is boring is really to say life is boring. I've sat in front of victims who disclose the most graphic and torturous experiences. I've also sat in front of suspects who confess to the most heinous crimes imaginable. And it's truth. Through nonfiction, I think we learn about people, about trends. We learn about motives. We identify with the characters, and we feel empathy. We learn that the victims in the case, especially in this case, this could have been anyone. This could have been me. This could have been someone in my family. There was no definitive victim type other than opportunity itself, I guess. And in this case, I couldn't make up facts more profound than what's in this case. I'll give you one example of that. In my interview with Shawn Grate, he told me that there was a victim that he pretty much definitively knew was going to heaven. And when I asked him, how do you know that? He said, well, right when I strangled her, she started singing Jesus Loves Me, so I sang with her. And I'm looking at this guy thinking, you just made that up. And I was thinking, what you did is bad enough. You don't have to say that. But I didn't say that. I was listening. I said, tell me more. He said, well, right when it happened, she said, Lord, forgive him, for he knows not what he does. And I thought, that cannot be true. I didn't say it, but I left there. So I went to talk to some of her friends. No one knew that he said that. I knew it. It's all recorded. There it is. I go to talk to some of her friends, and I said, could you describe her for me? And one lady said, she gets upset. She's really childlike. I said, what do you mean? He said, like, if she gets upset, she'll just start singing Jesus Loves Me. And I thought, that's true. It's not lying. I knew, based on that and some other conversations, that she does do this forgiveness thing. It is true. You can't make that up. And this is nonfiction.
Listen, Kim, this was amazing. Thank you so much for this. I really appreciate you coming on to talk about it.
Thank you for this opportunity. I appreciate it.
And that's it for this episode. Kim, thank you so much for coming on. Hunger to Kill, amazing true crime people, just different than anything else you've read. Can't recommend it enough. Hit us up, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Don't forget the YouTube channel. Give us a rating if you can on your pod app. If they got it, 5 stars. Really appreciate it. Until next time, nerds, stay cool.
History Nerds Unite.